we've now got about half the time to interact here, and we'll probably take a few questions and comments and then give the panel a chance to respond. Please mention your name and affiliation when you speak. I'm not sure if we do have microphones, so please make use of that as we go. Okay, thank you. Perhaps if you stand in yellow. Yeah.
My name is IFPRI with the United Nations Regional Commission for Western Asia. My quick question for Maximo. You gave us very good illustrations on the contributors to the market is for grains. Could you tell us what is the percent of the total production that is actually put on the market? I think this gives also an idea of the vulnerability.
Okay, up the back there, just yell, I think, until we get a microphone.
Yeah. My name is Chandrasekhar. I'm from India.
That sounds great. We can hear.
In this, with due respect to all the experts here, there was one term which I found was conspicuous by its absence when we discuss food price volatility and food price shocks is financialization of the agriculture markets. And I believe that's a potent driver of agriculture price volatility and price spike. Why are we not discussing that? There are a number of drivers, but when you introduce speculative capital into agriculture markets, it has an excessive, disproportionately large impact on prices. And that's something I think we need to discuss a lot more elaborately.
Thank you very much. So that's one perspective. Others would say speculators do the opposite and help to stabilise these prices. So that's an area where research can illuminate a little bit.
Hi, my name is Adek Abate. I am the leader of the Drought-Tolerant Maize for Africa under CIMMYT. I just was wondering, consider this a layman's question in economics, is there any merit to the price hikes? I'm asking this question particularly because when we developed some varieties and multiplied the seed and wanted to pass on to the farmer, they would take, but they would not take all the recommendations you have because the market is not very attractive for them. If they don't get enough profit for their produce, there is no reason you and I should be pushing these people to buy the fertilizer, buy the other inputs to increase production and productivity. So I was just wondering if there is any silver lining, as it were, about the price hikes, because in the 2008 period, for example, for many commodities, the farmers were better off, I thought. And I think we are emphasizing too much on the aspect of the consumer at the expense of the producer.
Thank you very much. I think Maximo did raise the possibility of prices spiking downwards as well as upwards, so that volatility does go both ways. And obviously the distributional effects are equal and opposite depending on whether the price is going up or down. We do need to think in, if we're thinking long term and not just about this recent period, about the downward price spikes as well. Because while it's true that a person who's extremely poor, spending 2/3 of their income on food, is having to spend 100% on food if the price goes up 50%, the other story is farmers who when a price collapses, gets a negative income as well. And of course, people move in and out of being net exporters or net sellers or net buyers of food as prices change around. They could go from cash crops to food crops, for example, if the food price spikes. But your question is more about level, really, for long-term adoption of new varieties, for example, rather than the fluctuations around whatever the level might be. Sorry, the next person was next door to you, I think.
I'm Nuguse from European Commission. My question refers to Maximo. We have shown us that there is no more price volatility since at least 2012. That is very good. But there is a trend in terms of increasing, the real prices of food commodities, and there is also a fear. That will affect, in fact, the urban poor and also urban and rural net buyers of food commodities. That will, in fact, affect the resilience in terms of food and nutrition security. And what is your view, and what will be the policy option for that one? Thank you.
Thank you. Simon, down the front here.
Simon, actually from the IFPRI board. Three things. One, where can I get a copy of these wonderful slides?
For a fee.
Where was it actually?
You.
The second thing is, I just wonder whether IFPRI has done any work on the relative importance to poor countries of international versus local shocks. We know that the global price crisis put 100 million people back below the poverty line. I just really, if you were the Ethiopian minister, would you be more worried about local or international balance? And then on this stocks thing, which of course is a very clever idea, but isn't the whole point about a global food shock, by definition that it's global and therefore covariate between all the countries in the world, never mind in a region? And so if there is a stock, everybody will want it at the same time, potentially.
Good. Down the front, and then I think we'll give the panel a chance to respond to some of these questions.
I would like to ask a question about the issue of crowding out that I think, Kim, you mentioned, and maybe someone else mentioned it, but the issue of humanitarian aid coming from publicly held stocks versus from spot market purchases or vouchers or some program such as this. It seems to me that it all hinges on whether there is any crowding out effect, and I would like to know what evidence that you are aware of, anybody on the panel, about the effect of the national stocks or the potential international stocks on crowding out, because clearly if an extra ton of political stores just crowds out one less ton of private stores, and if it's also true that political stores are less fluidly exchanged on the market, then those stores are going to exacerbate the price spikes. So that all hinges on the issue of evidence about crowding out, which I'd like to hear more about.
Can we have a quick set of responses to this first lot of questions? Maximo, do you want to start?
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me go through all the questions very quickly. In terms of the market structure and the export market, the idea, and if you look at the production, is basically something very similar, with difference of China, which basically consumes everything that they eat, no? And they are net importers. But the important thing there, and the message is how vulnerable we are geographically to specific climatic shocks that could affect the supply and therefore could affect the global environment. Okay? Which is, of course, these countries which are main exporters are also major producers. But the variance of which exports and which produce will depend on the size of the country. So it was just to put the concept of how vulnerable we could be unless we change that. Now, given saying that, there has been significant changes, especially in South America. So you have the corridor of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, which have significantly increased their supply and which have capacity because of economies of scale to switch immediately. And that was a clear example in the wheat crisis of the US because of the drought. Brazil could respond and do double cropping immediately and avoid a crisis. Now, the financialization of agricultural markets, I completely agree with Kim. And what we need to be clear there is speculation is normal, it's okay, it's good, helps. The problem is, again, when it's something too excessive. Now, we did that and we tested that across the different periods. The only time where we found evidence of excessive speculation was in January, February, March of 2008, if I'm not wrong. After that, we have not found any evidence of excessive speculation, which does not mean that the markets of commodities there has not been a financialization of the markets. And you have to be very careful in measuring this, because there is a lot of talk about the topic, but very little solid evidence on when it happens. Now, the other concept which is important is that speculation is not a driver, or excessive speculation is not a driver. Speculators will come because they want to gain short profits. And when they come, when you have excessive periods of volatility, because you have huge asymmetries of information. So if I have a model that better predicts changes in prices, I will have a lot more information than you, and therefore I will make profits. So that's when they come in. So they exacerbate. Is again the story of the track. So I have to be careful on that. On the question on the price, if it is positive, what the farmers want is positive trends. They don't want shocks up and down, because then, especially if I am a smallholder with a budget constraint, if I have an up and down, I don't know what to produce. And I don't have the technology of the US that I can switch and change my cropping in one night because I can use my tractors with satellites over the night and plant. So for a country which is not too developed, changes affects me completely because I can decide today to do soybeans and results that tomorrow what really was good to do is corn. Okay? And it has even happened in the US. US did a mistake in the drought of wheat. They should have planted soybeans instead of wheat. So we need to be careful with that, and that's the concept. The trend positive is good. Now, of course, a positive trend will affect consumers, and we know that. But the solution is not to lower the prices. The solution is to find ways in which income can increase so that they can better have access to it, or to lower that massive mess of tariff barriers, which basically will allow you to have food at a cheaper price. So those are the ways we need to think if we want to be resilient and solid. Now, the international versus the local shocks, that's a pretty important question. In Ethiopia, at least in the studies I have seen, what happened was that the prices were going up locally before even than the 2007-2008 crisis. And there was a lot of discussion around if it was bad measurement, if it was that the country was trying to, the farmers were trying to keep part of the production in local storage and so on and so forth. There were a lot of efforts to try to measure that. When economies are closed, of course, you care more about what is happening internally. When economies are more open, you are more vulnerable to what is happening. But that's one of the costs of being open. But at least you know what could be happening, and you will be able to respond to that. So I will be worried about both, because if I have an economy which is open, and I have an international shock, I need to find a way to resolve that problem. Okay? And normally, what will help me to resolve that problem will be having capacity to access. Okay? And what we know at the global level, for example, the case of Brazil, is that Brazil was able to increase the supply enormously, but the infrastructure that they had in the ports was so bad that they could move the commodity at the velocity they need to move it. So those are the big things that we need to look at and think carefully, especially in the bigger countries. But again, there are issues at the local level. Bangladesh is another example. I was in Bangladesh several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and the government was having a huge problem with the rice price. And Bangladesh consumes a specific variety of rice, which normally they can only import from one neighbor country. And the problem was that they knew that they had bumper production, so they have good harvest, but the price was not going down. That's a local problem market that I have to look and resolve. If we have measured the difference between the effects of the global and the local, for some countries we have done it, but at the end of the line, the problem of the local or of the global shock is that the effects are bigger because you have many countries that could be affected at the same time, while the case of the local is one economy. So it depends on what you want to optimize and what you try to minimize. And just finally, on the stocks issue, and I just will answer something here, which I think is important. I think it's very important to be careful, because the conditions to be able to have stocks that operate properly are very complex. You saw on the definition that he explained. So, and then you need to have a rule of distribution. You need to have eligibility and who I distribute first, because if I have a global shock and I have 20 countries which are part of my regional reserve, for example, who I give them first? That's why the concept of humanitarian makes a lot of sense, because I can prioritize based on an observable variable of who are the most poor and regionally who will need it fast to be able to supply that. What you want is them to have access quickly. So that's one important thing. The second thing is basically how you minimize the costs and how you procure. And when you procure, you need to be careful to be compliant with the WTO and the Green Books. And that's a whole discussion of the Bali meeting, which still is not resolved, and there is a lot of discussion around it. But you need to procure at market prices, and that's something that needs to be done. And finally is the trigger. So Asian, if I'm not wrong, have a trigger of weather, of extreme weather. That's an objective trigger, but not necessarily will be correlated with a problem of significant volatility. So we were proposing, for example, to use excessive volatility tool as a trigger, because then it's objective, everybody knows how it's done, it's global, and you can execute it. But they found an objective trigger, which is weather, which most of the cases in rice will be related to supply and supply shocks.
I was going to give Maximo a gold star for doing his first speech in 10 minutes, but he's just taken another 10 minutes now, so he doesn't get a gold star. I think we'll move back to the audience here and then accumulate a few more so that you each get a chance to have something to say.